You will never be the same.
And with the full catastrophe, he didn't mean it was all bad.
Oh, that I worship has a way of saying, don't play with.
I invite you to the dance with the Lord of the dance.
God didn't call America to do what she's doing in the world now.
Please dance.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Untitled, the joint podcast effort between Unfailing Love Church here in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and
Unfinished Community here in lovely, sunny Kobe, Hyogo, Japan.
I always make you say that one because I will never pronounce it right.
You know, as a complete side note that is unnecessary in a Bible study podcast, everybody thinks they're going to pronounce Japanese wrong, but the dang language only has 5 vowel sounds. It's like actually the easiest one out there to pronounce. It's easier than Spanish.
All right, I promise you I'll try next time.
Yeah. We'll do a bonus episode on how to speak Japanese.
Sweet, doing it. But anyway, I'm Pastor Tim. I'm from Unfailing Love Church of Fort Wayne, and this is missing one today. Pastor Mal was feeling a little bit under the weather, so it is just myself coming from the Fort Wayne side, and then this guy right over here.
And I am Don, who is loving the fact that we can gesture towards each other and not realize that we're both on the same side of the screen for each other. So He gestures to the left to me, I gesture to the left to him. It's the fun part about Zoom.
Yay!
Also, I'm gonna go ahead and throw it out here and just flat out call you a coward because I figured we should just not comment on Mal's absence at all. Claim it was the Mandela effect and leave it at that and see how many people bought it.
Even if I don't indicate that my wife's not here, my wife might get angry.
Yeah, the advantage I have in being thousands of miles away.
Right? It's not your problem, right?
Yeah, I can propose the risky and hilarious jokes, and then you can live with the consequences.
Yeah, and I just deal with it. Yeah,
exactly.
But yeah, no, this is our joint podcast effort where we just kind of crack open the Bible and we kind of dig at it, really, because questions come from over here, and then I'm going to signal this way, so maybe you're on that side of the screen. I don't know, but and then you're the learned one, so you're here to answer some questions.
Some pretty big air quotes on that.
But I hope that everybody that's watching is ready to learn some, because I think I am today for sure with this passage.
Yeah, I'm game to dig into this one a little bit. As I was pointing out to Tim in advance, is I've got 1, 2, 3 different commentaries open on this one. I've got an iPad full of internet resources, and I'm of course recording this on a computer with other things on it, and it's still. And I believe the technical term here, and so stop me if I'm being a little too weird. I believe the technical term to describe this verse is "screwy as all get out."
No arguments here.
Yeah. So why don't we go ahead and lead into the verse itself? Since you were kind enough to do our introduction, you want me to read this one?
That'd be fantastic.
All right, let's take it away. For those of you playing the home game, we will be reading from the Gospel according to Luke and Acts. They're the same book in part 1 and part 2, I want to remind you. Chapter 16, verses 1 through 13. I'm reading from the NRSV UE, the NRSV updated edition, which is usually my recommendation. It's not quite as poetical as other versions, but I got to tell you, it's probably the best researched one out there. Probably.
Yeah.
So let's take it away. It is given in the English, the heading, The Parable of the Dishonest Manager. Spoiler alert, he's the good guy. Let's get going. Starting from chapter 16. Then Jesus said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, what is this I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer. Then the manager said to himself, what will I do now that my master is taking this position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I'm dismissed as manager, people will welcome me into their homes. So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, how much do you owe my master? He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, take your bill, sit down quickly and make it 50. Then he asked another, and how much do you owe? He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you to the true riches? And if you've not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and wealth. I'm going to say that last part out there one more time for the people out there in the back. You cannot serve both God and wealth. In case you were wondering, eat the rich is biblical. Anyway, moving on.
I mean, we talked about this last week. We're not going to pull punches.
I have no intent of doing that.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think we all hear like that very last verse. I think that's the biggest thing we hear out of this whole passage is just like you can't serve God and money.
Mhm.
And then they go on to serve God and money. But,
And I'm gonna go ahead and throw the big one out there first. Is the way I've seen this used in the past, even by otherwise well-meaning churches, typically goes like this. No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and wealth. We will now collect our tithes and offerings.
Right.
That's the way I've normally seen that one given, which
not the point.
It's not only not the point, it's a little bit dishonest.
Definitely.
And we'll dig into the same themes of honesty and dishonesty here in a minute. But
for sure.
Like most churches tend to throw the whole you cannot serve God and wealth, so give us your wealth approach, which is, I can kind of like squint and see it if you're talking about like a church that's doing what churches are supposed to do, where they're taking literally all their resources out into the community, welcoming refugees, housing the homeless, feeding the poor. Like, yeah, okay, fine. You can't serve God and wealth. Give your wealth to the people who are doing the actual thing with it. All right.
Right.
But I'm going to go ahead and say 99.975% of the time, that's not actually what's happening.
Right. No. Yeah. I think you're probably pretty close on that percentage.
Yeah. So the warning here is that goals, in a sense, your aims are important with what you're doing. There is, particularly in our society, our American society, I say not to be Americocentric here, but I'm American. I know that we export our culture to the rest of the world, including all of our flaws and hilarious over the top stupidity. That goes out to everybody free of charge, like an extra bonus. One of the things that has been a constant through line in our culture since the beginning is the worship of wealth. And lest you think this newest generation is throwing off the pursuit of wealth in favor of other things, let me remind you that millennials and Gen Z were the ones who invented grind culture. So you can just kind of piss off with that. We all have it. It's a through line for our culture. We just develop new and unique ways of saying, I want to get me them dollar bills, y'all.
Right.
Yeah, and getting out of the mindset where wealth is important to us because it is wealth is important. And I make that differentiation there, by the way, because one thing I do know, money does actually solve problems. Like, I grew up poor. I know lots and lots of poor people do. There is not a single problem for us that the having of money wouldn't solve. But that's still a mindset where we're considering money as a tool to do a good in the life of ourselves and the people around us.
Right.
What it's talking about here is shifting to the service of money.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Makes
that's
sense.
always the point I want to hit first when we're talking about this one is, it doesn't mean that it's that you shouldn't have any money. It means that what money you have, you should be using to do good things and not, doing the Smaug thing and being like, it's mine.
Yeah, exactly. For sure.
Yeah. So
Yeah, that's a, I mean, that's a huge thing. Like that, I mean, you kind of touched on it.
mhm.
That was always a verse that was used right before tithe and offering was taken up, and it always really rubbed me the wrong way. But I didn't have the information at the time to really like push back on it.
Yeah,
And then when I did, that's when I started getting kind of the negative looks during, tithe and offering. And I was like, this isn't what this is supposed to be about.
right. Like this is about a totally, actually, spoiler alert, it's about nine totally different other things. This verse got a lot going on in it.
Right.
But the exclamation point on the end of this is not a call to offering. Like there are
No.
plenty of places in the Bible that talk about giving your money to the community and sharing it and redistributing the wealth and stuff like that. Fun side note for all of you playing along at home: the early Christians were communists.
Shocker.
So that most of the New Testament's function with respect to wealth is give it all to the church, and then we will redistribute the wealth appropriately so
Right.
that everybody's even and equal. So yeah, saying you cannot serve both God and wealth here isn't necessarily saying, so give us all your money so we can have all the money and keep it and do what we want with it. It's saying stop making this the central focus of your life and start doing things with it.
Right.
Because those commune societies will develop later on, like back half of the book of Acts type stuff is where we start getting the form into that. So that hasn't, historically speaking, in the timeline happened yet. So this is the teaching that kind of lays the groundwork for that kind of communist society.
Right.
Anyway, that's enough economic theory for today. What other questions we got?
So I mean, again, coming from the evangelical background where we did, the questions were always kind of pushed down, as I kind of said.
Yeah.
So question, what?
Yeah. What is a good question by itself? We'll just leave it at that, but do continue.
So I mean, there's just a lot that goes into this verse. Like, it feels like it bounces around a lot. And why is his master commending him later of like, oh, well, you changed all my bills to like half to 80% of what they owed me. Good job. Where are we losing?
I'm going to meet this parable with a parable of my own. When I was a much younger and fatter man, I gastric sleeve surgery, man, it's a great thing. If you ever get a chance and you are huge, go for it. But
I think I'll pass on that one for
now.
now.
No, you're good. You're good. You're good. I had the surgery and you're still smaller than me. You're good. Anyway, my point before I got hilariously distracted. When I was much younger, I had this kind of mental fantasy about saving the world, as all young men tend to do, and many young women as well. That pretty much just had me grabbing all of the oligarchs together in a room and saying, look, you remember that whole end of the French Revolution with the guillotines and whatnot? That's coming for y'all. So let's talk about how you might want to avoid that. And the easiest way for you to do that is to get ahead of things and give the people what they want now. Take care of people, build medical systems, build infrastructure, do all of these things now. You will lose some money now, but you will maintain your position at the top of whatever new society is coming out of this mess that's coming. As opposed to maintaining your Darth Vader-esque iron grip on your role as villains in society for as long as possible. I mean, you can ride this train for a while, but it's pointed directly at the ground, y'all. Maybe you ought not to do that. And obviously, I never had this conversation with the oligarchs and politicians of our time. I am but a humble pastor, not actually a politician. I leave the politicking to my cousin. But that is a conversation that I think could and should be had. And I think that's what Jesus is suggesting via Luke here as well with this particular piece of the parable. Is the manager here is shrewd, and the master is shrewd for observing what he's doing and realizing it for what it is. He's like, okay, yeah, I lose a little bit off the debt, but nobody hates me, and I built a relationship with the community because, and this is important, we humans do not exist in a vacuum. Our skin boils and we explode, because I'm a science fiction geek. But no, seriously, we don't exist in a vacuum. We are a part of a community interconnected with other people. And if your way of living is based on being exploitative and materialistic to the people around you, that's a path that ends at a guillotine. And we're not even talking about your eternal path. We're just talking about your worldly path.
Right. Yeah. Where are you just going to end up?
Yeah. You'll prosper for a hot minute. You might end on a high note, but either you or your kids or their kids are going to end badly, very badly, because eventually people get wise to the scam.
Yep. And history proves it over and over again.
Yeah. And this is something like I have this conversation with my kids all the time, is even like in the case of this manager here, even if we are to assume that all of his lending and his debts were acquired and worked with legally, ethically, morally, he's only asking people to pay back what they are owed. Let's make that assumption for a minute, because standards of the time, probably not true. Right. But you know what? Let's go ahead and make that assumption. It's still for the best to administer with grace and mercy.
Right.
Because, and as I explained to my kids, you may be in the right, but being a rules hog and saying, well, you promised, you owe me, and I'm calling you to task on your debt regardless, still doesn't make you the good person. Like, you can be technically right, but overall wrong at the same time. And this is the realization I think that's happening for the master here. Is like, yeah, I may have been technically right, but like, I don't need these resources in the same way that these other people do. And if I allow them to have their debt lessened, then I gain a goodwill that is more important than the resources that I don't actually need, because oligarchs are stupid.
This sounds vaguely familiar to something going on in our American community right now. I just can't put my finger on it.
Yeah, somewhere in the world, oligarchs are a problem. It must be Russia, right?
Yeah, something.
Yeah, they're the ones with the oligarchs, not America. Anyway, so that's more or less what's going on here. I think is Luke is kind of highlighting with the master's revelation, because like in the story of this parable, the master didn't have to realize that the manager was in the right here,
right?
And he didn't have to know that. Like the story, all of the other lessons in the story still work if the master was just like, yeah, okay, so you did that, now get out.
Right.
Like the rest of the story still works. So that didn't have to be in there for everything else to work, which tells you it's an important lesson here to be had. Like clearly there's something to take from that. And I think that is, as is common in the parables of Jesus, the rich man realize something that most human rich men rarely ever do, which is that, oh, hey, this is probably a smart thing to do.
Crazy that he would bring, a smart idea into a parable that he was teaching. Crazy
right?
Stuff.
Yeah. It's, I always wonder if like the rich men who repent and move forward in Jesus's parables, if they aren't like basically a reverse Mary Sue. Like, it's not exactly hero fulfillment. It's like villain fulfillment, the way you wish the villains were. Like, if I were the villain, I would just do the good thing. Right.
Just like, then I still get what I want, and it just works out for me.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a backwards Mary Sue. Anyway, that's pretty much the gist of it. What else you got? Right.
Well, I mean, we got 13 verses to pull from. So, but I mean, I look at kind of one of the other big ones for me, and just I have my phone with my handy dandy app on it here. So it's I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. And being a pastor who's on TikTok and waits for random trolls that come through my TikTok lives, I'm waiting for one of them to use that and say, look, your Jesus said that to be dishonest and use dishonest wealth to make friends. And it's like, I'm pretty sure that's not what it says, but I figure I'll lean on the guy with the all the learneds.
All right. So there's a couple of different directions we can go with this. First off, the easy one. I'm going to take my pastor hat off and I'm going to put my teacher hat back on. Living out here in Japan, I definitely do a lot of English teaching. And I'm going to ask you if you're familiar with this concept. That's a big one, but it's called the double negative.
Right.
I know, shocking, right? Not actually a huge concept in ancient Greek, but it still grammatically functioned that same way. But in order for that to work, you have to understand that wealth is a negative.
Right.
So we've got two conceptual negatives here coming up against each other: dishonest and wealth. It's also worth looking at here that perhaps an equivalently good translation would be to say something along the lines: make friends for yourselves by means of being dishonest with wealth.
Okay.
Which is also okay. And again, there's a larger conversation to be had here about dishonesty as a viable tool here.
Right.
But dishonest wealth is worth unpacking in this context, because honest wealth would be wealth that is being honest about what wealth is, wants, and does, which is to be hoarded like a dragon that means to eat it up some hobbitses.
Right.
So dishonest wealth is wealth that's acting against its own purpose, that is distributing itself, that is breaking with oligarchical and power control structures and moving out into the world in ways that are beneficial to people and caring for people and loving for people, which, as any of us living in post-capitalist America know, is not what wealth does.
What? I can't believe that. You're gonna have to run that one by me again.
Shocking, I know. So when we're talking about make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth, that's the Robin Hood passage here. That's
Gotcha.
Get that money out of there, suck it out of the rich like pulling pus from a wound, and just get it out.
So once again, eat the rich is biblical, is what you're telling me.
You think I'm joking about that? I'm not.
No, I'm 100% on board with that one.
Yeah.
We'll get right into that.
And before people start coming at me and saying, well, eat the rich has got to be hyperbole, we don't seriously mean that we want to do harm to the wealthy people. Let's not forget that Jesus at one point recommended taking rich people and jamming them bodily through the eye of a needle like a camel. Like, he was using violent imagery with camels and eyes of needles. And like, if you've ever wondered what that looks like, don't ever try it. It's a bad idea.
That feels nightmare fuel.
Yeah, the only way to make it work is with like an industrial strength blender and a lot of no morals.
Or a black hole with spaghettification.
That would do it. But what'd that do to the needle? Anyway, quantum mechanics aside.
I had to. I'm sorry, it was there.
No, I come on, lifelong Star Trek fan. If you didn't make the spaghettification joke, I would have.
There we go. Yeah, I mean, it's so basic when you break it down like that.
Yeah.
Because as you say it now, I feel almost silly for not having thought of it and been like, oh, well, when wealth is kind of the point of the whole message,
but
and this you can't wealth and God.
This is the thing for folks coming out of evangelical and evangelical adjacent, or just generally a parasitic touched upon backgrounds.
Help someone out there.
Yeah. I was going to make a reference to a Doctor Who episode, but I'm not sure anybody.
With the bug on the back.
Yeah, you got it. That's exactly the one. There's a Doomsday in New Earth or something like. Or no, the one right before it. Turn left. I think it was. It's turn left.
Yes.
Yeah. Donna Noble with a giant bug on her back for the whole episode. Anyway, yeah, that's pretty much the exact image I have here. But anyway, most of the way that these kind of evangelical parasitic ways of doing church power structures work, is by taking what is straightforward and teaching that it is not. So most people who've come out of those sort of backgrounds have spent their whole lives being taught that the Bible is complicated. You have to really interpret it and understand it in complex ways to get to what is straightforward. This is why we get people who insist on things like a literal hell or the rapture, which, fun side note in case we ever get to Revelation, is not in the Bible.
I was waiting on that one.
Anywhere.
I could see it digging at you, and you needed to get it out.
Yeah, I'll throw that one at anywhere. Things that don't appear in the Bible, by the way: a literal rapture, a singular devil, the concept of hell. None of them are in there. So you already got to be interpretive to make those fundamental parts of your theology. But that's been a journey for a lot of folks, has been this understanding that, well, you have to bend this and shape it to make it match our worldview. But we're not going to talk about that as what we're doing. We're going to claim that this is fundamentalist, that this is how it's
always been. Yeah, of course.
When if you look at the straight reading of the text, like an actual straight reading, if you come at this with just a basic amount of education, read the text, look at some of the basic context of what's going on, it's not hard to see what's happening here. Like this is Jesus telling a parable that says, hey, y'all, money, not so good. Maybe don't do that. Maybe just give grace to people instead. And then you've got people in the evangelical communities who are saying, it says dishonest wealth. Well, dishonest is whatever I don't like. So I'm going to say that, say, people in sex work are making money by means of dishonest wealth because I don't agree that sex work is a valid profession. So there you go. That's the dishonest wealth. And I was like, no. One,
Stop, back up. First off, it's saying dishonest wealth is a good thing, so you shot yourself in the foot in the first place. Two, even if it wasn't, dishonest wealth is wealth acting against its own interests. It's pretty straightforward there. So that doesn't have anything to do with specific professions you don't like. It doesn't mean, and this is what I've heard too, is anybody who dedicates themselves to work in a secular profession rather than working for the church is making money by means of dishonest wealth and therefore must be shunned. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I sit at a computer for 8 hours a day. I'm clearly the devil.
Well, that depends. Are you on Reddit or 4chan?
Working.
Yeah, working, as people in front of their computers often do.
Fair enough.
Dude, I'm a pastor, and we met on Reddit while I was at work. We get it.
This is fair. Yeah, call a spade. I get it.
It is what it is. We all know how work is in the 21st century. But yeah, so this sort of mentality of twisting these passages around and then claiming that it's a straightforward fundamentalist impression has been an evangelical tool for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And so it's not surprising to come to this and be a little shocked that a straightforward read is possible.
Right.
Because so many have just not been doing it for so long. You've been trained up in these techniques by which you have to look at the Bible and see convoluted language.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times were you in churches looking at the Bible as a collection of these and thous and weird statements and stuff like that, even though you're reading from the Message?
Right.
Like, that's cognitive dissonance right there. Is the Bible is linguistically convoluted, but I'm actually reading a version of the Bible that is so linguistically straightforward that it's actually mocked by people all over the world. Eugene Peterson, I'm sorry, I like your theology, but the Message was a mistake. Anyway.
What about 2.0? Was that any better?
Yeah.
That was my like carrying Bible during youth group, man. It was Message 2.0 because I could read it.
Yeah, you're talking to a guy who sat through his sustained silent reading periods in middle school with a copy of the NIV, just daring people, because I'd been told by my parents and my church that people are looking to persecute you for reading the Bible. So I'm like, all right, if that's the case, I'm gonna sit down with my Bible and read it for SSR. And nobody said a word about it ever.
All I can see is you with a Bible just ready to like, come on.
That's kind of me, but like I'm swinging it at the rest of the church, so
Right. Yeah, that's you now. That's the other side.
Yeah. I like to take old idioms and put a fun twist on them. Preaching to the choir is more or less what I do these days.
It's fair. Not wrong.
All right, so those of you watching on YouTube probably noticed the suspicious cross dissolve that just happened. Those of you listening on the podcast probably noticed that my tone of voice changed dramatically.
Man, I can't imagine why.
Maybe one of these days when we split an episode like this, I'll find a musical sting to put in here or something. But in the meantime, as I have lazily gotten to my point, today's episode, as you've probably noticed by now, ran long. So what we're going to do is cut it here for today and come back next week with a whopping part 2 and the exciting conclusion to this week's episode. if it weren't for the fact that I would get demonetized here, this would be the point where I would put in the tag music from the end of Best of Both Worlds Part 1, which is perfect for cliffhangers. I absolutely
Yeah,
love it.
absolutely.
But we would almost certainly get copyright flagged for that.
Yeah, let's not do that.
So not going to do that, but I could imagine.
Yes.
So
just picture in your mind. Picture in your
exactly.
mind.
So as we just said moments ago when we were ending the episode in total, like, share, subscribe, share, and also share. And then
Links
we're
all
going
down
to
there.
share a little more, because the more eyes we get in front of this, the better. Links and stuff are down below in YouTube. They're in the description on the podcast channel. Pass it around, share the wealth, dollar podcasts, y'all. Spread it around. Get the word of God in people's mouths, or just get them looking at crazy pastor types who like to rant about the Bible. Whatever floats your boat.
That's us, right?
I'm crazy. I can't speak for you, but I would generally tend to assume so.
Fair.
Yeah. So in the meantime, have a good week. We'll see you with the exciting conclusion, which may or may not be introduced in the voice of Majel Barrett Roddenberry. It won't. Next week. Take care. Have a good week, y'all. Bye.
See you guys. Love you.